Hello and welcome back to Freedom Matters with Mark McIntire. I am your host, Mark McIntire. And today we're hearing a lot about whistleblowers from Washington, D.C. Now, some of them have yet to even be identified. They're sort of like secret whistleblowers for political purposes, I suppose. But today, here on our show, Freedom Matters, we are very privileged to have a whistleblower who's actually out in the open, who's not afraid to be identified as a whistleblower. His name is Eric Cochran, and he used to be a software engineer at a social media site called Pinterest. And we'll get into exactly what they do in a few minutes when Eric joins us via Skype. But I just wanted to open by saying that I think, as you'll see in this presentation, that Eric has sacrificed his career to bring to public awareness and notoriety the fact that our social media platforms actually have nefarious and devious ways of excluding certain messages and certain participants from their web social media. And so I'd like to welcome Mr. Eric Cochran to our show. Nice to have you with us, Eric.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. Let's start with, how old are you, Eric? I didn't even know. How old are you?
Just turned 26.
Oh, great. So you're enjoying all of the benefits of being a legal adult right now, right?
Right.
Drinking and voting and maybe even going off to war. Congratulations. Well, actually, you're already in a war. I'd like to open up with having people to understand where you're from. Where were you born? Where you brought up?
I was born in Greenville, South Carolina. I mostly grew up just north of Atlanta, the suburbs of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of spent, made my bones there, and then went to school at Georgia Tech.
Oh, you did? You went to Georgia Tech?
Science.
Huh. So you studied software engineering at Georgia Tech?
I did, yes.
Right.
I studied software engineering, and then actually, like when I first learned to code in college, I was really excited to like make products that people could use, that my friends could use, and then that's when I discovered like Android, the whole like smartphone thing was kind of taken off at the time. This was like 2013 or whatever, and then I discovered I could actually use my software engineering, the things I was learning in school, to make like end products that my friends could use, and then I was like spending all my free time just doing Android apps.
So you were a serial app maker even while you were in school.
That's right. Yeah, I think I posted like a few dozen apps on the Google Play Store at the time.
Wow. So you get an early start. I was a professor of philosophy for 23 years, and towards the end of my career, I always encourage my students to learn how to code and learn how to deal with apps. So I'm glad that you have actually done that, and otherwise you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be talking to us. What about your political education? Were you brought up morally and politically? Were you brought up in would you say a liberal household, a conservative household, a Christian household, and atheist? How did you grow up in terms of your moral compass?
Yeah, I grew up pretty conservative. It was my parents are Baptists. I would say we kind of lean Calvinist, I suppose. And so Protestant evangelicals, and so my moral compass was kind of there. I kind of built on it a little bit in high school, and but. My main thing was always the life issue, being pro-life. My parents, they back in the early '80s were out there at the March for Life. They've been lifelong supporters of a lot of pro-life groups, and I always knew that would be the biggest issue of my time.
Yeah. Now, how did you get hired at Pinterest? With that background, with that moral compass background, how did you get hired at Pinterest?
Well, in San Francisco, so after Georgia Tech, I took a job at a small startup in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, everybody would kind of say like, oh, the politics is going to be a culture shock, and I didn't really think much of it, especially before 2016. It was like, okay, and you basically keep your politics
Right.
very low, or
Right.
you even pretend to be, a far
Apolitical.
leftist. You agree with people around you,
Ah,
yeah.
yeah.
And even though there are, conservatives or right-wing people in tech, they certainly feel the pressure to either shut up or agree with people. And so, I just kept a low profile, and spent a couple years at a small startup. And then I was pretty heavily involved in the Android development community. I wrote a lot of open source software, so like code that's in a bunch of apps out there that people use, and then also speaking at all these tech conferences. So I was very fortunate enough to have a lot of connections inside of the bigger tech companies, and then after I left my startup job, I took a job at Pinterest to work on the Android app and like the performance, very technical stuff, very like making the app start up faster. I was, all into it. Was very much my passion of like all these tiny little optimizations to make the user experience better and measuring all those things. I loved it.
My eyes roll into the back of my head because I can't program, I can't write, I can't do any of this stuff. So listening to you explain all this, I'm amazed that these things can happen. Why were you interested in the Android platform, if I may ask you, rather than the iPhone, the Apple platform? What drove you to the Android source?
Oh, it was really because it was very easy to use a lot of the actual like pieces of the phone. So originally, like when I started in 2013, Android was very open to lots of different kinds of apps. You could use like the location sensors to like change your phone's vibration or change your ringtone or something. And so these were a lot of the what we call APIs, like basically the things that programmers can use to affect your device were usable on Android, but not so much on Apple's iOS at the time. Google has since kind of cracked down on that Wild West mentality on Android, but it was very attractive. It was very powerful. You could make a lot of very very cool apps, and I just loved it. I was always driven by like the product. I always liked making these things that end users could end up playing with and enjoy.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to me that you actually speak almost in religious tones concerning the Android, just as people speak in religious tones when they work with Apple products and Apple applications and Apple software. So I'm glad you cleared that up. I wanted to ask you though, when you were onboarded at Pinterest, did they sit you down and say, "Now look, Eric"? Let's talk a little turkey here, Eric. There are certain things that you might object to. For instance, we're going to not allow people to do X and Y and Z. We have a social agenda, and we're very pro-choice. We're very we're sort of atheistic, anti-Christian, and we don't really, have a great regard for heterosexuals. Did they say anything like that to you?
They would never say anything like that. They're not they're not dumb enough to write those kinds of policies down generally, or to say it in such explicit terms. So that's the thing, is like you see these public policies and what they'll tell people they're all about, and inclusion and diversity and everything like that, things that are very good on the surface, but then they're very discretionary, depending on the people who actually work there.
Yeah, we're going to loop back to this when we talk about the constitutional points that we're going to bring up at the end of the show. But I just wanted to clear that up, that when people get jobs in the private sector, there are all sorts of agendas that the corporation has that the new employee may not know. It's a culture. It's a corporate culture, and being such, as a private institution, a private company, they certainly have a right to have a political culture. But I just want to clear that up. It was never explained to you what was going to happen to you. Now let's get into how did you discover, and what did you discover that made you become a Pinterest whistleblower?
Yeah. So, first of all, the reason I went to Pinterest instead of Google or Facebook or Twitter is because at the time I was like, okay, Pinterest is this, relatively small, I think about 300 million monthly active users. And the user base is moms in the middle of the country, and so I was very much hoping we wouldn't become the Facebook. We wouldn't become all of these other big companies with these heavy-handed social agendas. And then as we got bigger, as we got closer to becoming a public company, being publicly traded company, we would have more and more of these meetings where we would talk about our social obligations and what we need to do to crack down on hate speech and misinformation.
You got the social justice indoctrination, social justice warrior indoctrination.
So we would have these things, and they would use these very vague terms about hate speech and misinformation, especially around elections. This really all started to kick off near the end of 2018, with the elections, and then I knew, as much as we were talking about it, we would always use very extreme examples to talk about hate speech. We're like, oh, we have to get rid of the Nazis, and everybody agrees. Or we have to get rid of the misinformation, what people are saying, medical misinformation. We need to remove that. And I'm like, yeah, everybody agrees.
Right.
But then they would keep talking about it, and then they would make entire teams dedicated to this. And I was like, okay, something's going on that's not just these fringe examples they're talking about.
Right.
I know what's happening. I know what people tend to mean when they say hate speech.
Right.
They tend to mean really mainstream American views, but they don't want to say that in explicit terms.
Right.
So it was at that point that I started to look around to see what was really going on in the implementation, because I know what we say in our public policy. I know we say that, we don't take political sides. We don't take these ideological stances. And but then let's see what's happening in the implementation. So, and I was just a software engineer. I worked on the Android app. This wasn't my day-to-day. Like I said, I was a very technical person. I cared about making the app start up fast. But I was in the position that I did have access to a lot of these lists and these implementations of these policies. So I went and looked, and the first thing I saw was what we called our sensitive terms list. And this was a
sensitive terms list. So they had their own dictionary. They had their own vocabulary with an accompanying dictionary, right? So is that
right?
All right. So you had to use this dictionary in the process of your work, right? Is that right?
So not directly in my work, but this was more on because I work on the front end, what users use in the Android app, but this is more on the back end, the servers, and everything when you connect to Pinterest.
Okay.
And these are terms that de-rank things when you go to search, or when you get a notification, or when you're on your home feed on Pinterest. And so this list is filled with tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of terms, and of course most of them are terms that you don't want to show up in your search results. That they're crude terms, they're pornographic, or they're conspiracy theories, or etc. And but then I started looking more and more, and then I would see things like Ben Shapiro, a very mainstream conservative guy, and then I would see things like Christian Easter and Bible verses, and this would block things from autocomplete. And when you're like,
can I interrupt you for a minute? Because you got to remember, I was born when dinosaurs roamed the earth. All right, and there's a lot of folks who were born with me at that particular time. So can you explain deranking? Can you explain that process to us?
Yeah.
Because I don't understand how things get deranked in software.
Right.
I don't understand that.
So, for example, when you go onto Pinterest and you're searching for something, maybe you're looking for, it's an image board, so you could be searching for lots of things. You'd be collecting images for your campaigns, etc. And you're searching for something. Maybe you're looking for Bible verse inspiration, and these are terms that would not show up near the top of your search results. They would purposely push things that were labeled with these terms down in your search results. So it would de-rank them in your search results.
Right. So somebody is really driving your bus while you're searching. You're not really doing the searching. You're searching only through what they want you to search through. Is that
right?
Have I got that right?
In the ideal world, right, is that this would be open policy. That they would say, okay, here, we're going to show you the search results of the things that are most clicked on. This is how it works. And, minus maybe we'll filter out like conspiracy theories or whatever. Yeah. And but then that's not what's really happening. Then it looped in with the conspiracy theories. They had things like Christian Easter, Bible verses, Ben Shapiro, et cetera, et cetera. And
Now,
that was
wait a second now. You just said that Pinterest was a social media platform for mostly women, right? I mean, mostly moms, right? Isn't that
right.
And they're talking about their babies and their families and their churches and their their social life, right? Wouldn't that be a popular thing for these women to search for and to try to find, like Bible verses? Wouldn't that be popular with those people?
Right. And you see that is like, this goes against the business interest. But again, you have policymakers and implementers that think that they're very high IQ people who need to protect people they're very far away from mainstream America, and so they need to protect people from these crazy ideas. These Bible verses might radicalize people. These kinds of things.
Right.
And
right.
It just shows the entire mindset, the worldview of people in these positions and who make these discretionary calls. So the sensitive terms list was my first entrance. I was like, okay, something's, this stuff is newsworthy. And I took this to Project Veritas, and there were other things as well. There were like protection lists for 2020 candidates. They were protecting like Kamala Harris and other candidates from certain pages. And they would also.
So when you say protected, they were excluding from even posting any other user or any other individual who would actually attack Kamala Harris?
It means they dedicated resources to monitoring any criticism and such, and and take appropriate actions based on those. But you'd see they wouldn't have any protection list for maybe Republicans. I never saw that. But so there were other minor things like that.
Apparently they didn't do a very good job, because she's polling 5th in the state of California. They really suck at their job. That's what they were doing.
There was also an employee who said they had to remove Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens because they were white supremacists. So there was other insane things like that. But I think really the biggest thing then was later on I hadn't even thought of looking at this first. I had this burn block list. And so it was purposefully because, you don't want porn on Pinterest. That's part of the public policy. No porn. It's, supposed to be a site for moms in the middle of the country. Right. And so it was filled with tens of thousands of these X-rated, horrible sites. And I never even thought to look on there. I never thought somebody might hide something on there. Right. But then I happened to see a message from an employee mentioning that Live Action was on there. Live Action being one of the U.S.'s leading pro-life organizations. Yes.
Wait. So somebody moved Live Action, which is a pro-life advocacy group, they moved it onto the porn list?
That's right. Oh, yeah, and this employee was noting that it wasn't a mistake, and that she had received a user complaint that he wasn't able to see Live Action content or something on there. Right. But she said, I do think we need to keep it on there. So it was clear that this was not a mistake, and they intended to keep Live Action on this. So this was my first clue to go looking into this. I looked into this list, and then what I found was just horrifying, really, because I saw lots of right-wing sites on there. There were news sites including PJ Media, Gateway Pundit, and of course Live Action, many other right-wing or anti-establishment news sites on this list, and you can see it all on the Project Veritas expose for all the details. But Live Action, of course, being one of the biggest, and it was very clear that they were secretly putting these websites, these anti-establishment or right-wing sites, onto this list in order to hide that they were even censoring this content. Right. And so what this effectively meant is if you are a Pinterest user and you went on and you tried to post a link to Live Action, for example, and you're like, here's a news story from Live Action, I want to share it to my board about, my baby pictures or whatever, and it would give you a vague error. It would say, oh, there's not a there's been an issue. Try again later or something
Yeah,
like that.
I've seen that. I've seen that. I was always wondering whether or not, because that happens to me on Twitter all the time. Every time I will say something that's outrageously right wing, I'd get a message saying, "Oh, something awful happened. Try again later." Bye.
And so, that's what we see from the outside, right? And so we've seen all this anecdotal evidence beforehand about we see this from social media companies where it's like, oh, it's just a bug, or there's just a bug this day, or something went wrong, but then I was like, okay, the public has to know this, because here's the how and here's the why. This is how it's happening on the back end, and here is why people are censoring it. They do think that this is misinformation that they have to keep away from the public. And again, these are mainstream pro-life views. 50% of the country currently identifies as pro-life, and then when this leaked, then Pinterest was forced to say publicly that they actually banned Live Action's account after the story came out, and they said you're misinformation and you have a direct negative impact on our users' health. And so they had to say their position publicly, that they're in the abortion lobby's pocket. And so that's what we need more. These tech companies we have to force them into that position of saying, look, are you a neutral platform as you claim to be, or are you going to have to admit that you're taking an editorial stance here on what ideology you want to support?
So they're not fully disclosing to their potential users, and even as a business model, one would think that if your target audience, your market, was moms from the Midwest, if that was your group, it would certainly damage your business, wouldn't it? Would it not? I mean, wouldn't that be detrimental to your business model, because you're shutting off 50% of the people by actually admitting that you are discriminating against and have biased against a pro-life group?
Right, and again, it shows the worldview of the people. I mean, the people who implement these policies are 100% ideologically driven, and that matters a lot more to them than the business policies of the company. So again, they view themselves as these people who have to protect the country from misinformation. They really believe it.
Yes, they wrap themselves in righteous indignation, and they are the moral den mothers of the world.
And the thing is, we have these activists in these Silicon Valley companies. That's the thing, is it's not just about Pinterest. This is what's going on inside of Facebook and Google, YouTube, Twitter, and the thing is, 90% of people are either people like me or people who are just live and let live. I'm just here to program. I'm a very technical person. I want to do this. But then you have about 10% of people who are diehard activists who will do what it takes to get their ideologically driven, their ideological drive through the company, and then they bully people into silence and through fear, and then they end up driving the entire company in these directions.
Yeah. So let's, the studio clock tells me we're about 34 minutes left in the show. We've got still a lot of ground to cover. And I want to take this moment to thank Alex Magag, and he's our Vice President for Talent Acquisition. He actually met Eric personally at a conference. I think it was the Value Voter Conference, if I'm not mistaken. Was that correct? That's where you met
Yes.
Alex? But you strike me as not a bomb thrower. You don't strike me as a terribly dangerous character, right? So what led you to cross over the border to actually become a whistleblower? I mean, you found out all this nasty, covert deranking and censorship going on. But what motivated you, Eric Cochran, to actually say, look, I don't care if I get fired. I don't care if I get fired. Well, what happened to you?
Well, for me, there was really no other choice, because the thing is, it matters right now. This is the time, because they're gearing up. I mean, this is about Roe v. Wade. It's about the 2020 elections, and the 2020 elections are about the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is about Roe v. Wade, and the abortion lobby is all in this fight. And so for me, even though it means giving up, the job and friends in Silicon Valley and these other activities and such, the thing is, it doesn't even feel like a loss of anything, because this is what ends up mattering, because all that other stuff just goes away after a lifetime. At longest it lasts my lifetime. Maybe I buy a house, maybe whatever, the comforts of all life, you get the newest iPhone or whatever with the money that can buy you. But this is what ends up mattering. We need, and this is why we need more people to go all in on the fight, because this is the time that actually matters. There's really nothing left to save your ammo for.
Well, that's a very important quote that I pulled off of your now famous interview by Mr. James O'Keefe, the founder of Project Veritas. You actually ended your interview on that quote, that what are you saving your ammo? And of course, we don't mean live ammo in a gun, we mean moral ammunition, right? As a moral agent. And that's why I asked you to be on our show, Freedom Matters, because it occurred to me that you have this transcendental affiliation to advocate for freedom, that it really matters to you that people know what they're getting into when they go on these social media sites, and when they're not, the media site doesn't disclose the list of forbidden words and forbidden ideas and censored organizations. They don't disclose this to you. So that's what impressed me, and I wanted you to be on Freedom Matters, because it seemed to me that somewhere along the line you value more of the transcendental realities of our life rather than the pure material.
Well, I think that's what always matters. I mean, the thing is, like, I think there's a problem in society where we're so individualistic that we just think of ourselves as individuals who can't make a difference. And the fact is, like, we all can, and we can all end up affecting our grander narrative throughout history. And so, like, that was the thing always for me, was like I was always, I could stay in tech, I could keep making money and funnel money to the cause. And so we definitely need those people. They're the people. You can either do nothing, you can do something, or you can fund the people who do something. And so that was always my place. I viewed, I was always like, okay, do I need to be on the front lines? Do I need to be an activist on the ground? Or do I keep funding, the cause? But then when I saw this wrongdoing, then like I said, the decision was just clear to me, because this is the thing that makes the most difference in the fight for truth and transparency in our society.
Well, the perfect segue into our next topic, which is a constitutional discussion. And I'm sure you're very well versed on it, because the place where you're working now, Project Veritas, is knee deep in actually eyeball deep in this controversy about as a private social media platform. What do you have to say about the constitutional rights of any social media platform, not just Pinterest, but Facebook and Twitter and everyone? Do they not have a First Amendment right to say, no, we're not going to listen to this message, or no, we're not going to allow people to say certain things? Don't they have a constitution? They are arguing that they have a constitutional right to suppress certain ideas and certain individuals and certain organizations that advocate views that they simply detest. What's your take on this, Eric? What's your take?
Yeah, so the thing is, they want to have their cake and eat it too. So Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, lays the ground for being either a platform or a publisher. So if they want to say, we have a First Amendment right, and we will publish what we want to publish. The end users, we don't want our end users seeing pro-life content. We don't want our end users seeing Republican content or pro-Trump content or whatever it may be. Then they're free to be the New York Times, basically. They're free to be a publisher of information. But then they are they can be held for libel. Right. As a publisher, right. And they're responsible for the content that they actually publish at that point. The problem right now is that they go to Congress and they say, no, we're not a publisher.
Right.
We're actually a platform.
Exactly.
And
right.
so as a platform, we can't be held liable for any content that's
right.
posted on our site. We don't have any interaction with the content. We're just the platform for other people to publish, and that way we can't be sued. And but also, along with being a platform, they're not supposed to have publishing rights. They're not supposed to have this editorial bend. So that's why I say they want to have their cake and eat it too. They don't want to be held liable for content they publish, like the New York Times, but they also want to have the publishing rights of the New York Times.
So they want all the benefits. They want all the constitutional benefits that protect publishers, except when it interferes with their advocacy of certain, or their suppression of certain ideas. Yeah. So they don't want any of the negatives. They only want the positives.
Yes.
So how do you think this is going to shake down?
And so that's really the I think that
Yeah. How do you think it's going to shake out, though? I mean, this is going to find its way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm almost confident of that. How do you think this is going to shake? Let's put Eric Cochran on the Supreme Court. All right. So a case comes to you that brought to, let's say, a whistleblower like yourself or somebody else, and they say, well, wait a minute, they can't have it going both ways. They can't be a publisher and not be a publisher. How would you, I'm asking you for the wisdom of Solomon now, who actually tried to cut the baby in half when the two moms actually disputed the parenting of a child. So how would you solve it, Chief Justice Cochran?
I hate to be prescriptive. I mean, my main job here is as a journalist and to get the truth out. I think the thing is, when we build up enough moral outrage, as we've seen this from muckrakers and journalists in the past 100 years, that when there's enough moral outrage, that something has to change, reform has to happen. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that reform will be. I think if I were to say something, I think it'll probably be in saying that these companies, at the very least, have to stop false advertising. They have to stop saying, they actually have to put in their public policy, that yes, we are going to censor this type of content, because right now they go in front of Congress and it seems like they're lying when they're, it very much has the appearance of lying based on the evidence when they go to Congress and say, we don't have blacklists, and then, like, for example, this Google whistleblower who came to Project Veritas a month or so ago, revealed these blacklists, or, when I come out of Pinterest and I revealed these blacklists, and so they at least have to, be truthful in their public policy, and I do think it'll probably, eventually the long-term solution will be, if not Section 230, something very much like it. And I think it also speaks to a broader issue in America right now, where we're seeing, is not to get off topic, but just briefly, where we're seeing in the NBA, bowing to China, and I think it just speaks to a broader issue in America where we have lost this social trust, where we have people who are feeding other interests. They have their own ideology, which is so separated from mainstream America that we can't even trust each other. And so we have to be able to come back to this consensus to be able to continue to live together as a nation.
Yeah. I happen to, we were discussing this in the control booth with our director, Elliot Jacobson, and also with our line producer, Michael Nicholson, and they're waving their hands there too. Great way to get on the show, guys. We were discussing this. This is a very interesting constitutional issue. I proposed, very much similar to what you did, and I didn't know what your opinion was at the time. But let me ask you, let me put it in the form of a question. Do you think that the court, the High Court, could recommend to the legislature that they craft some legislation that would make it transparent when I sign up for a social media site? I'm greeted with a little card screen that says, okay, we don't like homosexuals, we don't like Christians, we don't like people who practice abortion, we don't like atheists, we don't like certain groups of people. So if you're offended by that, then go someplace else. Do you think that would be workable?
I don't know. I think that again, like, just speaks to the fact that, like, if we're at that point that we're so divided as a country, it's just untenable. If we can't even do business with each
Interesting.
other,
Yeah.
if we're that so far different, like,
Yeah.
we just have major issues. And so, like,
Yeah.
I agree. There's some things where it's like, especially on, like, religious issues that we've seen, that there's these cases where we can't do business with each other. But, like, now that we're seeing this at a grand scale, with these tech giants, the most powerful companies in the world, who are like, yeah, we're going to ban your YouTube channel, we're going to demonetize you, you can't make a living now. Like, then these companies are monopolies, and they're so powerful, and they're pushing down on the anti-establishment that it's going to be really tough to live together as a nation in the U.S. going forward.
Well, it strikes me as interesting that some of the very people who are always screaming about transparency and full disclosure, I mean, everywhere you go, we're all transparent, are they, when it comes down to operating their own particular operation? We find this in boards of trustees, at colleges and universities. We find it in labor unions. We find it everywhere. Political campaigns, campaign organizations. When it comes to operating their particular little fiefdom or dukedom or duchy that they control, they're suddenly not interested in transparency. They're not interested in full disclosure. And they would probably argue that to put up such a placard, as I briefly mentioned, we don't no men accepted, no, we don't allow these people on our platform. That it would ruin their business. I mean, they wouldn't have any business. I mean, who in their right mind would sign up for something like that unless you were really desperate for that type of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Like, they don't want to be, they certainly don't want to be transparent. A lot of these companies in tech, especially, like, they refuse to do audits and such. And if they were explicit, then of course people in the middle of the country would be like, okay, wow, like, I didn't know I was signing up for this.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
exactly.
and that's true of, like, all of the establishment, no matter what it is, like you were saying, in political campaigns or in media or in big tech, etc. They all fear transparency, and that's why I really love, now after Pinterest, shoved me out the door. And now I work full-time at Project Veritas, working with more insiders inside of these institutions. And that's why I really love working on it, because it's like we go, these companies, what they say in private is not what they say in public.
Well, that's
we have to expose.
Yes, that brings us exactly to your work at Project Veritas. Tell us how you got this position with them, and tell us what you do and what you want to do. So I've got 3 questions there. Take them in any order you want. Go for it.
Yeah, definitely. So after the Pinterest story, I at first was in shadows because, again, like, the story wasn't about me. And also, if I could keep funneling money into tech, from tech, into, for example, Pro-Life San Francisco, a group I'm affiliated with here in San Francisco, that would be great. But, I think Pinterest, I had accessed enough of the information that they found the access logs. They kicked me out of the building, fired me. And so I was with James O'Keefe up at headquarters of Project Veritas. After the story, we actually then had a Google whistleblower just a couple weeks after the Pinterest story. We kept the pressure on tech. We released this Google story, and I worked on that. And then I turned to James and I said, I think I might go take a job maybe with Live Action or maybe with Pro-Life San Francisco after this. And he said, well, would you consider taking a job here? And I told him, it's like, please don't feel any obligation to me, because, like, I don't want this to be like, the whistleblower needs a job or anything like that. I don't want a pity job. I don't feel ever any obligation to me. But he said, you could help inspire more of these insiders and do your best work here. And I believe that's true. And so I, was more than happy to go full time at Project Veritas. So that's what I do. And so now I work with these other insiders at big tech companies, especially, but also media. We actually had this CNN whistleblower in the last week. His story go public.
I didn't hear about that one. Can you briefly describe CNN?
So this guy inside of CNN actually he had this hidden camera, and he worked with us, not just worked with us, he talked to us about what he was doing, and he had hidden camera. He recorded these hundreds of hours of his work with their extreme political bias and their agendas, and how they would actually move the news cycle to what they wanted, and so we started releasing these tapes over the last week. And in fact, today there is actually some big possible sexual misconduct allegations from these tapes. So some big, we even got Jeff Zucker on tape. So it speaks to the power that these whistleblowers really have. All it takes is one person to be brave and wear a camera. So these insiders, and by the way, if you're on the inside or know somebody on the inside of an institution, don't hesitate to contact us. It's veritastipsprotonmail.com or projectveritas.com/brave. And James O'Keefe and I will personally read your messages and work with insiders. So now, I work all over the country working with these people inside of tech or media or government, etc. And then as for, the future, what we also want is what we think is going to be very important in the very near future is the abortion debate. Like I said, this is gearing up about the Supreme Court and about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And in fact, there's a Louisiana law going up to the Supreme Court now that may overturn Roe v. Wade in the near future. And so we're actually looking for pregnant undercover journalists. So if anybody knows any...
I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified for that job. I can't do it. I'd never be able to fake my way through that. I just don't have the equipment, I'm so you're working with a group at Project Veritas. I think you're calling it Insider Advocacy, Insider Advocate. Is that the group you're working with? Inside that?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're trying to get a Rolodex. You're trying to get you're trying to encourage other whistleblowers who are experiencing similar censorship issues and lack of transparency issues that you've experienced. So you're actually trying to grow an awareness movement. I would call it. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we want to grow both, our insider program, more whistleblowers coming to Project Veritas. Again, it's just one person can make a difference. One person contacting us, projectveritas.com/brave can really make all the difference. And then also more people, if you're not on the inside of an institution, becoming undercover journalists. We'll pay people to go undercover, to work with us, train people up. To wear a hidden camera and expose corruption.
Mm-hmm. So actually, you're soliciting people to, especially pregnant women, to actually go undercover and go to Planned Parenthood and places like that. Is that part of the program?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's wrongdoing in abortion clinics, among other things, and and again, we have our insiders back, we have our undercover journalists back, and we train up these people, and they're really rock stars, and they're the anonymous heroes of the entire country, really. These people who expose these horrible things inside of political campaigns and abortion clinics, and they keep the establishment accountable.
Yeah, you remind me very much of the next program we're going to have is with Miss Johnson, who was a member of the Planned Parenthood organization, and then she when she got inside the organization and she actually saw the evidence of how these abortions were performed and what they did with the fetal material after the abortions. And then finally, I think she's going to be on our show the next program. But you remind me of her in a great sense that once people know what's actually going on inside of these organizations, because they're not transparent, they refuse to be transparent, then they actually have a moral turn of events. They have an existential moral moment, as you did. And so how would you, that leads us into, we've got about 13 more minutes on the studio clock here, but how would you mentor or help people who are watching this and listening to your story? How would you help them to make this moral existential moment decision?
Mm. Well, I think the hardest part is always taking the first step. It's like, I think all of our insiders will attest to this, is like, once you work with us, unlike, the thing is, if I had gone to like the San Francisco Chronicle or the New York Times, the Washington Post, they would have turned me in. They would have stabbed me in the back. But as our insiders can attest, it's like we have our insiders' back. We protect their anonymity. We protect their safety, and we want to tell their stories. It's not just like we get a phone call and then we run a story or something. So the first part is really just taking the first step, talking to us, letting us know what's going on and how we can help expose the truth and tell their story. And so working with them, this is great. Like the first step, sometimes they're in a position where, like our CNN guy, they can wear a camera and they can expose corruption, in what people are doing. Sometimes they're in a position where they have seen documents, or they know they have access, like in my position, to certain documents that expose corruption. And sometimes it just requires a little bit of curiosity to find out what's really going on.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I learned in my own experience, because I was, they tried to fire me from Santa Barbara City College, but they weren't successful. I got a lawyer. I did two things. I got a lawyer, and the first thing the lawyer asked me was, "Where's the paper trail?" So it's very important. The one thing I always advocate for people who are trying to do what you're doing is document everything. Make sure you document things. Make sure you get a paper trail is the best, because that's rather irrefutable in terms of that. Video evidence is great, audio evidence is great, but also people should know their rights, and that's why I always advise people to consult with an attorney. I'm sure that at Project Veritas you do a very thorough job at vetting people in terms of making them understand, what their legal rights are. That's very, very important. And so I want to get into we have about 10 more minutes left. How do you think this is all going to shake out in terms of this moral awareness, this existential moral moment that you and so many people are having in Planned Parenthood, at CNN, at so many other places? How do you think Generation Z? You're probably a little bit older than Generation Z. You're probably at the very end of the millennial group. Right? Am I right about that? I don't know.
That's correct.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to ask Alex about this all the time. I don't know anything. But how do you think your generation is going to fix what our generations, plural, have created as a big mess, actually, in terms of freedom?
How is Gen Z going to fix the country? The thing is, most things are not about laws and about the resulting policy. It comes down to the people. I think this is the thing I've realized more and more is, like, we have a great constitution, we have great founding documents, but are the people willing to keep those values? They don't. It's just a piece of paper if the generations to come don't share that tradition.
Now, in your own education, which is why I started off the show by asking about your own education, the Constitution of the United States, which is primarily what this show is all about, rests on certain transcendental principles and values, which seem to have vanished from the public square. They certainly have vanished from government schools. And yet you went to a government school, did you not? Or am I wrong about that? I mean, did you?
I went to a private school.
You went to private school. Okay, so I'm mistaken about that. I apologize. So you got your private education as a Southern Baptist, is that right? Your family?
My family is Southern Baptist. Mm-hmm.
So you grew up with your parents guiding you towards transcendent values, that this life is not the end-all and be-all of human existence, that there are some intangibles, non-materials, things like freedom, things like beauty, things like honesty. These are the things that really are going to determine what legacy you leave in your life. And I don't know how Generation Z is going to overturn it, because it seems to me that the far left has completely dominated government schools. Both the staff, the trustees, the staff, the administration, and also certainly the faculty, even down to the local school boards. So how, it seems to me to be a really heavy lifting project for Generation Z to reverse 50 years of slow corruption and decline of these transcendental values. But I want your view of it.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. Is that the establishment, that especially like the left has taken over establishments and pushed down from there, and so that's been it's a huge hurdle, especially in schools. With that said, I think that Generation Z, I think within everybody, we're seeking order, we're seeking beauty, and I think Generation Z does see that. They have that transcendental leaning toward against the corruption that they're seeing, and so it's kind of remains to be seen if right now they're just reacting against the establishment, or if they'll end up being a conservative or right-wing movement come out of Generation Z. But I think there is a good chance that they do have this draw towards order and against the decay that they're seeing right now, and so much corruption within these institutions, that they'll say, we've seen the previous generations live these lives of comfort. We've seen everybody get everything they want. Get long lives with iPhones and houses and just it basically escapism in a lot of ways. And has it made them happy? Has it made a difference in the world? And so I think Generation Z has a good chance of seeing the results of that and saying, maybe there's more to it than just the iPhones and all the comforts of life. Maybe I can actually, bring beauty, make something, create something beyond my individual self. So I think that remains to be seen. I think we're seeing the trends of that. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit unclear, at least to me, if they're just reacting right now, as every generation does, right. Or if they'll continue that trend.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I'm old enough to have served, I think, or lived under 7 presidents of the United States. I'm 75 years old, and I can remember being most impressed by the regime and the administration of John F. Kennedy. In fact, I wrote a one-man John Kennedy for myself to perform, because when we lived through the Kennedy era, we were not concerned as much about materiality. We wanted nice cars, we wanted a good job, we wanted to spend money, but we also wanted to reach for the stars. Kennedy said that we're going to go to the moon in this decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Now that's a transcendental idea. You have to really let that, and they did go to the moon. We landed on the moon just before the end of the decade, just as Kennedy had wished for. But now we're talking about the disposition of people's genitalia. Now we're talking about abortion after birth, infanticide. There are laws on the books in certain states where a newly born child can be left to die on an operating table because the mother has decided, well, okay, the baby's born, but I really don't want it. So every generation, you're right, has a heavy rock to lift. And somehow I believe that your generation and the ones younger than you are going to be able to lift that rock. It's way beyond my comprehension as to how you're going to do it, though. I've got to admit to that. Now, we only got about 4 more minutes, and I promised you that my last question to you, Eric, by the way, thank you for being with us again. But why is the world going to be a better place because Eric Cochran lived in it?
Well, I hope that I inspire far more people. I hope that people understand that this is the watershed moment, that this is where the people have to be all in for the fight, especially for pro-life. I think that the abortion lobby is pushing down very, very hard. We're going to see more and more censorship of, because this is what it's about. It's about the censorship of anti-establishment views from big tech, and no issue threatens the establishment more than the pro-life position. Fighting the abortion lobby is the most powerful right now. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that more pro-lifers inside these big tech companies see this and say it's time to say something. I hope that more people who are pregnant, who are brave and would like to go undercover with our journalists, come to Project Veritas, projectveritas.com/brave. And I just really hope that I'm able to inspire more people and spread these ideas of transparency and beauty and order to beyond myself, and bring out more of these whistleblowers and destroy the corruption that we're seeing inside these establishment institutions.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Well,
running your own social media platform?
No, I think we'll be abolishing abortion at that time.
Interesting.
I think I'll be very heavily involved in that movement, and fighting the abortion lobby right now.
Interesting. So you, the one thing I like about you is that not only are you very morally oriented in terms of your compass, you know what your compass is, but also you're very optimistic. Have you ever asked yourself, where does this unbridled optimism come from in your soul?
Well, if we weren't optimistic, we wouldn't be here talking about anything. I've been on panels where people say America is doomed, and I'm like, why are we here then? Are you just trying to make money or something? So I'm optimistic because I really think that it just takes, a few good people to really end up making a difference. It just takes the whistleblowers, the people who are 100% committed. I think that the willpower of single-digit people is indomitable, and I think if we set our minds to things, that we can fix things. So that's why I'm very optimistic for the future of our nation.
Yeah, and I think there's also a psychological component. Each of us are very different people psychologically. Some people can take risk. You are a risk taker, obviously. I mean, you've risked your whole life, the remaining part of your life. We're coming to the end of the show, and I just want to thank you for being such a brave moral compass for your generation and for the rest of us. Thanks very much. I'm Mark McIntire. This is Freedom Matters.